Good morning to most, good afternoon to others, and good evening to our viewing audience across the pond. My name is Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I want to first say thank you guys so much for your patience. We're having some massive technical issues over here in Baja, as there is a pretty big music festival going on down the street, and that thing does put massive stress on the infrastructure here, from our water going off and on, our power going out over here on this side, and of course our internet being somewhat unreliable. But we are here now. Hopefully the show goes off without a hitch. Worst comes to worst, I'll just tell the guest today, or ask the guest today, to walk on over with his laptop, and we can move this to the terrace so you guys can see for yourselves. But today we're going to discuss diagonalists, doppelgangers, and left liberal identitarians, a review of the Naomi Klein book Doppelganger. The concept of a doppelganger is often reserved for the realm of science fiction and noir thrillers, but in politics, the idea of a doppelganger holds its own peculiar intrigue. Here at This is Revolution Podcast, we've encountered our own version of a doppelganger, a show that shares some surface level similarities, like having black men and the word revolution in its title. However, upon closer inspection, those similarities begin and end with the name. Over the years, I've noticed people confusing the two shows, likely because the other show began with a completely different name and was eventually forced to change it. If you're really paying attention, you'd see that the radical rhetoric they espouse is more of a theatrical performance wrapped in a contrarian nature and a penchant for identity politics. Ben Burgis, in his recent piece for Damage Magazine titled Left Identitarianism is a Mirror World, addresses this phenomenon. He describes a political diagonalism that superficially mirrors the left but aligns with drastically different political priorities. This doppelganger of the left is a shadowy reflection using its rhetorical notes for opposing ends. Burgess writes about how this diagonalism is anti-war when it comes to democratic actions in Ukraine, but reveres Trump despite his aggressive foreign policy moves. They claim to support free speech and oppose big tech, but next to the extent of democratizing these platforms, just reshaping them to fit their agenda, with a preference for billionaires like Elon Musk over Mark Zuckerberg. This so-called anti-establishment radicalism that echoes the rhetoric of the left is, in reality, a mirror doppelganger serving the interests of the bosses in the Republican Party. It is a critical examination of how political narratives can be co-opted, leaving behind a superficial resemblance that betrays its origins. Let's delve into this discussion on political doppelgangers and explore how they influence public perception and political discourse. Please welcome my good friend and neighbor, Ben Burgis. Ben, how are you?
I'm good. I don't know what all this is about doppelgangers. I thought I was on to talk about whether 1992 was the best year in rock music.
92? I would say hell no. For me, I would say God no. I think that's the year the Use Your Illusions came out, or is that 91?
I think it might be 92, but I got no, I just, you're always doing some random year, so
yeah, next week, because me and Conan are both born in 77, and my birthday is not next Monday, but the Monday after that, so I guess about 2 weeks. So next Saturday we're doing the year in music 1977. I was up in the wee hours of the morning writing this script, and also trying to put together that playlist, which is now 3.5 hours long, and I haven't even really broken into all the disco stuff yet. So 77, a pretty interesting year in music. Well, first off, what did you think of Klein's book?
Yeah, so this could easily get buried since it is a mixed review, and I say some critical things about it, but I liked the book. It's a doorstopper, like a lot of Klein's books are, but I would have kept reading, right, if it had been longer. I think that there's a lot of good stuff in it. I think she's right about a lot of important things. And I also, I also think like the writing is really good. I mean, as I was writing the review, like every time I kind of looked up a turn of phrase to quote it, I was like, man, that's pretty good.
I agree. Naomi Klein is a very good and prolific writer.
Yeah.
But you had some issues with the book. Oh, can you hear me? You're getting a little choppy.
Oh, no.
But you can hear me now. Now you're. Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah, I have consistently been able to hear you, so I don't know.
Okay, as long as you can hear, we'll figure it out on the back end. Now, Ben, how would you define a political doppelganger, and why do you think they are so prevalent in today's political landscape? I start the show off by talking about another show that shares the word revolution in our name, and there's also Black people, and there has been times over the years, I don't even know if that show is still on anymore, where people would send comments like, I thought I was watching your show, but then I was like, oh no, this isn't you guys at all. I'm sure they got the same thing. But
yeah, which is actually a pretty direct parallel to the sort of opening gimmick.
Oh no. Can you guys hear Ben? Oh no, Ben. Ben, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Ben? Can you switch networks? Because I think this network is throttled. Okay. So while Ben is trying to get his network situation situated, I wasn't joking, guys. This festival happens one time a year, and it's insane. I went downtown to try to pay my I went downtown to pay my Wi-Fi bill, and I tried to leave early yesterday before all the shenanigans started with road closures. I did not, in fact, miss the road closures. And I ran into a good friend of Ben and I's, and she was saying that one of her friends is renting out, or someone she knows is renting out her condo because the festival's on the beach for $930 a day with a 3-day minimum, and people paid for it. It's insane. I don't get it. But there's so many people here right now. Looks like Ben is back.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that crispy picture. No,
Nice.
Look at that guy. Oh,
nice.
A whole new Burgis.
Yeah. So I was just wondering what's wrong with me that I didn't think to rent this place out. But
I think we all thought about when I heard that number, and then our mutual friend Connie, who told me, she goes, "There's people all over," because there's a Facebook group for people that come to or live in Rosarito that can't find a place. There's just a bunch of kids here that need somewhere to stay. And for 5 seconds, I thought about it, Ben. And I was like, I just can't have Trump party kids. You know how I am when anyone spills something on the floor. Oh, yeah. But
so yeah.
What is a doppelganger?
Yeah. So, a doppelganger and folklore is, like you see the person who, seems to be completely identical to you, and like you're seeing them as a sign that you're about to die, that kind of thing. And the sort of opening gimmick of the book is she's talking about how many, many times over the years she has been mixed up with Naomi Wolf. In fact, she has this really funny story about being at like a bathroom near like Zuccotti Park when the Occupy Wall Street protests are going on. And she hears these two women at the sink talking about like this ridiculous shit that Naomi Klein just said. and she said she felt like she'd regressed to high school. The mean girls, are talking about her, in the bathroom, and then she realizes as she was listening to them that they're actually thinking about Naomi Wolf, because very similarly to what you were saying about the other podcast in question, there are all of these sort of zany similarities that, beyond having this first name that I guess is just uncommon enough. So, that they're both, Jewish women with, brown hair and this and that. And they had to, she lists off a bunch of these things. At one point, she was reading an art, like after she'd already started to get kind of fixated on this, she was reading this article about Wolf that casually mentioned that Wolf's boyfriend was a film producer named Avi. And Klein's husband is a film producer named Avi. So
insane, though.
Yeah, no, exactly right. So there are a bunch of these sort of strange, superficial coincidences, on top of which, again, I think the name is just uncommon enough that if you're one of the two most prominent Naomis who does like political commentary in English, then you're probably going to get mixed up with each other a bit. So that's kind of the opening gimmick. And I will say, when I first heard about this book, it was at the Socialism Conference last August in Chicago, and Klein was doing a presentation on it. And I was going to meet a friend there, and my friend told me later at the hotel bar that he actually they had actually left early on because he thought that this whole sort of premise was kind of gimmicky and ridiculous, which I get. But I think that it's really being used as this kind of literary device to explore something way more interesting, which is about the difference between Klein and what she stands for, and Naomi Wolf and what she stands for, and then what that says about the existence of, as you're talking about in your opening monologue, this political current that in some ways feels like a doppelganger of the left as a whole, right? So Naomi Wolf, started out as sort of the mainstreamiest of mainstream feminists. She wrote about unfair beauty standards and things like that. She, in fact, in 2000, she was a consultant for the Gore Lieberman campaign, and then by like the Occupy Wall Street era, she had this moment where she was drifting towards a more much more leftish oppositional stance. She liked Occupy Wall Street. She liked Julian Assange. And she, even then, there were signs of what was to come, because she had a bit of a conspiratorial approach to the whole thing. The United States was always like teetering on the edge of fascism. It was about to become a police state. As there were crackdowns on Occupy and whatnot. And then when COVID, well, I should also say that, I think a crucial part of this story is that Wolf burns up a lot of her mainstream credibility because she wrote a book where she made like a really, really basic error in research that was exposed in just like a way that no matter how much you hate Naomi Wolf, like I find I can't, like, I've listened to the clip a couple times, and it's just painful that like in a radio interview, she realized that she'd made this like very, very basic mistake, like as the interviewer is correcting her, that like there's this phrase "death recorded" that means that she was in like these old records that Wolf was assuming meant that the person had been executed, but just sort of due to the quirks of English law in this era, it actually meant that they'd been, they'd been pardoned from execution,
Mm.
and so like that's the whole premise of the book, and it's just, you know, again, it's incredibly painful to listen to. I think she became a bit of a laughingstock because of that, and then she'd always had this conspiratorial bent. I also think that even during Woolf's leftist phase, let's say in the early 2010s, she never really had much of a material analysis of the world around her. I think that, you know, there was some sort of vague anti-elite kinds of sentiments, and, you know, governments can be bad and scary, and that's kind of about it, right?
Would,
Which,
would
yeah.
you agree that a lot of people during that time kind of also have that same quote unquote leftist bend, especially when we
Mhm.
talk about the Occupy moment, which is a reason why I don't really posit that as the beginnings of something, because it's just so all over the place. And so many of those people do fall into the Alex Jones camp of conspiratorial thinking, anti-vaccination, and I'm not talking about COVID. I'm
Yeah.
talking about like measles and mumps.
Right.
A lot of anarchist thinking. Socialism is still not really a word that's being uttered the way it's uttered in 2015, 2016.
Totally. Yeah. Um, I mean, look, there is. I'm sorry, I was just hesitating as I was starting to say this sentence because, you know, I don't want to. There's at least one person I could think of from real life who has embodied this, who I probably shouldn't say, but like, there's a real like crunchy to Q pipeline, right? Like,
Yes.
I mean, yeah, like if you like you know, back in 2000, like the late 2000s, early 2010s, anti-vax stuff was largely left coded because that was a hippie thing, right? Um, and in fact, you know, if you go back to like 2008, there are moments on the campaign trail when both Hillary and Obama, you know, neither of them endorsed any of that stuff, but like they pandered to it in a way that's kind of jarring to read some of the quotes now. Because, you know, they're like, oh, well, there are legitimate questions here, you know, please vote for me. And yeah, I think that what I've just finished describing with regard to Wolf is certainly not unique to her. And it's not even unique. I take this is your point, right? It's not even unique to people who ended up going Wolf's way, right? So like in some sense, what I just said would be, my critique of somebody like Glenn Greenwald, who I think is like 1,000 times smarter than Naomi Wolf, you know, but I think has some of the same problems. That there's this sort of generic anti-elite kind of sentiment that's not, you know, tied to material analysis, so it can go off in some pretty wild directions. Um, and yeah, I think, yes, please.
Would you call this in your paper? You write about diagonalism, and I actually ended up looking up more things about diagonalism because that was the first time I'd actually heard that term. Um, you use diagonalism to describe a form of anti-establishment radicalism. I think that's what you're getting at now.
Yep.
Can you really explain what that anti-establishment radicalism is and how it manifests in politics? And how does diagonalism mimic leftist rhetoric while serving fundamentally different political goals? And I think this is the most important part about apparently Klein's book and this idea of diagonalism, because I do see it kind of infecting parts of the area that we live in this leftist media space.
Yeah, totally. Diagonalism is a term that Klein uses. I'm not sure about its prehistory before a book, but that she uses to talk about basically the sort of place that Naomi Wolf, her doppelganger, ended up going when the pandemic started, and she reacted to that in ways that channeled all of her worst instincts. The conspiracism, certainly, at the core of it. And I think in combination with that, she'd already become something of a laughing stock. I think her conspiracism about COVID, which alienated, whatever friends that she had left of center. And I think I think there's also just an interpersonal aspect to the dynamic here that happens in, many such cases, which is that once your old friends won't talk to you anymore, you'll hang out with whoever will still have you. And little by little, humans being what they are, you'll start to be influenced by some of their views. And so in Wolf's case, that's like Steve Bannon, who, Wolf, like over the, this time period just became a fixture on Bannon's podcast, The War Room. And, when you're looking at the sort of populism that, Wolf and Bannon came to represent, which has this branding that's very like, oh, this isn't ideological, or it's like cross ideological or something like that, then this is what she's thinking about when she uses the term diagonalism. So things that, as you said in your opening monologue, squinted at just the right angle, look like the themes of the left. So, it's anti-war if you're incredibly selective about what wars you're talking about, right? Like Trump, ripping up the Iran deal and assassinating Soleimani and doubling the rate of drone strikes in Yemen. None of that seems to count against him, and certainly don't get these guys started on China. But yeah, but they sound anti-war when the context is restricted to Ukraine. They, again, they have this surface hostility to big tech, depending on which big tech you're talking about. And there are even some of the like really nonsensical things they spout have this sense where they sort of feel like distorted echoes of things that a leftist might say. So, for example, one of Naomi Klein's books is called The Shock Doctrine, and it's about how, emergencies are, real or imagined, are used to cram unpopular, neoliberal policies down the throats of the population. And then when you look at Wolf's plandemic stuff, it sounds a bit like that. It sounds like this really stupid version of that, rather than, officials sort of fumbling in the dark, trying to respond to an unprecedented public health crisis in whatever way made sense with the constantly changing information they had. This was this plan to institute this authoritarian social control, which, by the way, nobody who says stuff like this is, it's like, I really want an update from some of these people now, right? Like, oh yeah, how we've all had to have, vaccine passports for the last 4 years, that very real thing that's happened.
Yeah.
Whatever. But it's kind of like how, the deep state faked Sandy Hook, but they couldn't even get any gun control legislation, out of
They just did it to do it to just prove a point.
I guess, yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing that she's thinking of when she talks about political diagonalism, or this kind of current being like a collective doppelganger of the left. And before getting into where my criticism of the book comes in, I mean, I really think it's worth highlighting that Klein also says some smart things about how the mistakes of the left create an opening for this stuff. That, she talks about how oftentimes, there's this sort of reactive thing that happens that, when they have touched an issue, now it's like toxic and, we can't talk about it anymore. And, so yeah, like there is this very stupid, conspiracies about vaccine passports, for example, but there is within that, there's this germ of a real issue about, tech surveillance, for example, that oftentimes people are very dismissive of because, I think we all know the way that, in the era of nonstop online political discourse, I think we know that the way a lot of that works, the rules say that, whatever the people who most annoy you are hot and bothered about, at any given moment. Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, that's
is this why you think diagonalist movements are able to attract followers who might traditionally align with leftist ideals? Like outside of, like, how do you think Steve Bannon and his ilk are able to gain a certain amount of traction in a certain, I would say, I guess, anti-establishment space in the left? We definitely know that there's shows that are maybe a little more Bannon friendly. How do you think that rhetoric is able to capture people that might otherwise kind of espouse lefty ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly, and I know that when you start listing the stuff off, people are like, well, that's not a leftist, that's actually a right winger. It's like, yeah, okay, but like, I think you're missing my larger point, right? And who counts as a true whatever is not, I think, really the essence of the issue here. But like you look at how somebody like Jimmy Dore could, go from, I don't know, like Bernie Sanders is a sellout to Tucker Carlson is making some good points. So the first is sort of framed as a missive from the, from the far left, and and then the other sort of doesn't really make sense, with that, right? It's like, oh, Bernie didn't fight hard enough in the right ways for Medicare for all, but Tucker never pretended he supported that. So it's kind of nonsensical on its face, but I think these dynamics are part of the answer to that. That I think that it is the case that part of what's going on here is if certain kinds of complaints or themes resonate with you, if maybe the people who annoy you the most are mainstream liberals, and you see these people who sort of have very anti-establishment optics, who are opposing those guys, and then the thing that's supposed to be a left alternative isn't really speaking to your concerns in a certain way, then I think that's definitely part of the story. But I will say, and this does bring us into, my critique of Klein, that I think that there are a lot of other ways that that the left doesn't present a appealing alternative. So I think that there's, I mean, like just to go to kind of the main point of criticism, I think that a lot of leftism, as we know it right now, is this sort of weird cocktail of, old-timey socialist politics and this kind of liberal identitarianism that is, that's incredibly alienated, that, that in a certain sense is incredibly alienating by design, because I think that it really caters to this kind of elite taste for self-mortification, for the sort of pride you take from having gone on this kind of moral vision quest to become a better person and an ally and all of that stuff. And I think I think that ultimately, if we are in a situation where not only sort of the libs, but also people who are supposed to be a left alternative to the libs are ultimately telling people, oh, you are you are innately part of this oppressor category, that at best you can undergo this like kind of moral reformation and become a good ally, always listening, always learning, always worrying that your privilege will be peeking through and distorting your judgments. Then I think that's not a very appealing message. And then when somebody like Steve Bannon comes along and says you're a hardworking, salt of the earth American, who's been screwed over by the globalists, like that second one is much more appealing.
Do you think this has, excuse me, something to do with a kind of end of history moment that really starts, of course, in the 90s as the internet, there's a burgeoning internet, and people like Bill Clinton, before he leaves office, is talking about, we have this third way, because the left-right binary in which you see the world is antiquated. And there's a third way to see the world. Does it feel like this diagonalism is kind of glomming on to these ideas?
Yeah, it's a right-wing third way.
Right? Yeah. Like a right, a further right, a further right third way.
Yeah. No, I think there's probably something to that. And I think I think it also speaks to the superficiality of all of this stuff, that there is that interesting echo, with Clintonism and Blairism in all of this, right? Because even though the pitch is the opposite, right? So in the sort of classic, Clinton, Blair, I don't know, throw in Ehud Barak. I think Carville helped elect him too. That kind of third way is ultimately this kind of technocratic managerial sort of liberalism, like very much like on its face. It's that, right? That if you like watch old episodes of The West Wing, right, which are as a little time capsule of this era, so much of that show is about people patting themselves on the back about being like experts who are smarter than normal people. And like if you think about like when Hillary Clinton ran for president in 2016, they just repeated over and over and over again, oh, she's the most qualified person to have ever run for president, as if this is this kind of technocratic job interview rather than having anything to do with clashing ideology, never mind clashing material interests. So that on the surface is exactly the opposite of the sort of Bannonite, populism where you say, oh, we represent the forgotten people, people who, J.D. Vance said in his best line in his RNC speech, that our jobs were sent overseas and our children were sent off to war, which, apart from that, our Mr. Venture Capitalist who had summer break with grandma in Appalachia, putting that aside, right? It's accurate enough as far as it goes. But those are two sort of different rhetorical strains, but ultimately, despite this like big divergence in the rhetoric that's used to sell them, these are both still claims that, oh, look, the sort of old way of thinking about politics where, you have, clashes about how to distribute resources that pit, workers against capitalists, in the sort of, purist version of that, critique, or, some watered down like New Deal populist version of that. that's outdated. That's yesterday's news. You know, man, we have the information. You know, we have the information superhighway now, and there's no more Soviet Union. You know, but like they're both sort of doing some version of that, right? But like ultimately, the boring truth is that we do still live in a society that is thoroughly defined by all of the old capitalist economic hierarchies, and that the sort of core issues really are about distribution of resources and power, and you know, whether it's sort of you know, technocratic or pseudo-populist, when you say, oh no, all of these old ideological, you know, distinctions have broken down and, you know, new alliances have emerged because we're really talking about new issues. It's like, yeah, at the end of the day, you're still like, all of these things, right? All of the neither left nor right pitches end up being extremely right-wing in practice, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, whether it's the sort of Clintonite, sort of socially liberal, graded on a curve for the 1990s, but extremely economically right-wing version, or, you know, the Bannonite version, which is just, you know, it's just conservatism. I mean, that, like, you know, I always, you know, encourage anybody who's, you know, confused about this to go check out a debate that Steve Bannon did back in like 2020. I think it was before the pandemic, but I think it was like the first couple months of 2020. Maybe at the end of 2019, he did this debate with David Frum, who of course is a never Trumper Republican, who is
curried a lot of favor over the last 8 years being a never Trumper Republican.
Totally, right? I mean, a million.
He's the favorite of kind of like a certain liberal Democrat that really points to this, to a person like David Frum, and says, see, this is what we mean by orange man bad. Even the people on his team don't like him.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, look, a million resistance liberal ants and, you know, wine moms have forwarded their nephews, you know, like David Frum articles about Trump, you know, a very proven way. I mean, the man's, you know, gone from being the author of George W. Bush's Axis of Evil speech to true fact, to being totally rehabilitated by liberal America. But it's fascinating to me, if you watch that Bannon Frum debate in Toronto, the Monk debate in late 2019, early 2020. Look, you know, Frum throws a lot of rhetoric about Bannon, you know, being a fascist, and Bannon throws a lot of, you know, populist rhetoric about salt of the earth deplorables at Frum. But at the end of the day, it's amazing how little time they spent arguing about policy in that debate. Like none, basically. And as I was watching it, it occurred to me, it's like, oh, right, because they're both Republicans. Like, at the end of the day, they want the same stuff.
That's very true. Moving on. Damn it. Sorry. I'm
All
trying
good.
to find these questions. How do identity politics play into the formation and appeal of these doppelganger movements? And why do you think there is a tendency for some of these groups to lean heavily into contrarianism as part of their identity?
Yeah. So I think that the whole issue of identity politics comes up in a small way. It's like mostly around the edges in this book. There are a few points where it really comes to the fore, but, you know, it comes up in a small way, even in the dedication, right? So it's the dedication is to 3 or 4 people, and One of them is, so they're all people who'd like passed away in maybe the year before it came out. So some of them are ones that, I'd sort of, so 3 of the 4 are Mike Davis, Leo Panich, and Barbara Ehrenreich. And then the 4th is Bell Hooks. And I saw that. I was like, oh, right. That's that's an interesting one to throw into that list, right? That's, at least from my perspective, one of these doesn't feel like the the others. And I think she says some like there's one point in particular in the book where I think she says something that's sort of to paraphrase Tropic Thunder, you never want to go full identitarian. She really does in one passage, right? I'm sure we'll get to, but there are, there is some of the stuff scattered around the book, and part of the reason I'm making such a big deal of it, right? Because I think you might sort of reasonably say, look, Ben, even if I agree with your critique of some of this stuff, if you look at this massive tome, right, and how relatively little of it is. Yeah, I think that was Thomas Friedman, but it was definitely, he and Fromm were definitely on the same page. That, in that it's look, this is such a small part of it, right? Like why make a big deal? But I think it's a really interesting contradiction because, I would argue, I argue in the review that this stuff, really, this stuff really doesn't fit with sort of the best of Klein's politics and the best of the book. And in fact, I would argue that this too, in a lot of ways, is a kind of, diagonal, mirror to the kind of, old time left politics that, that the sort of best parts of the book promote, that, in the same way that you can say about, Wolf and Bannon and Dorr and blah, 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 that these people have this sort of pitch that has left aesthetics in certain ways, but it has this underlying content that's really incompatible with what the left at its best has stood for. I would argue the same thing in this case, that that I think that when you get right down to it, when somebody like Bell Hooks, talks about how all the ills of our society are caused by, I had to look this up because I knew I wasn't going to remember all this, the imperialist, supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. One of her favorite phrases. I have to think, it's like, look, that the inclusion of the word capitalist in there gives the whole thing kind of a radical edge, right? That, this isn't just liberalism, we're doing something, we're doing something that's really radical. But I gotta say, in all that, long compound phrase, capitalist kind of feels like an afterthought to me, right? Mm-hmm. Like, is that really what gets you most hot and bothered? It doesn't sound like it. And the rest of that stuff, I think, is just sort of taken from, liberalism, where when I say liberalism, I don't mean like, I don't know. I don't mean like what our friend Matt McManus might mean about sort of certain basic philosophical premises about, equality, or, everybody having certain rights or civil liberties being important. All that's good stuff. Let's take that as read, right? But what I mean is liberalism in the contemporary American context, this kind of identity liberalism that is very powerful, of course, the Democratic Party. Think white women for Harris, and really, certainly certain kinds of campus activism, for example, and really is just very pervasive in spaces like academia, certainly spaces like any kind of liberal or vaguely left of center media institution, damn near, that like all of these kinds of institutions that I'm talking about will sort of, the last few years, like they'll all kind of have these, weird periodic crises where, I don't know, somebody said something vaguely problematic and the staff room is in revolt, and to pacify everybody, they have to, they have to appoint, a new executive vice president for, inclusion, and, have 3 new trainings and, stuff like that. Right. Like, I think we're all kind of familiar with the script as it constantly plays out in those kinds of places. And I think if you really think about what that worldview is and what it says, like what its analysis of injustice is, right? What its analysis is of what's wrong with the world as it currently exists, and what its prescription is for changing it. I think both the analysis and the prescription are really, very much at odds, right, with with the traditional left program, right? That because look, I mean, what has the left always said? That, and when I say this, by the way, I don't. Sometimes I think, because part of the problem with this is that people often get a few different distinct subjects mixed up. I think in a certain way they're trained to get these things mixed up by the way these terms are thrown around. And if anybody is hearing this as me saying that, like, I don't know, racism or sexism have ceased to exist, or these aren't problems in the world, then you're not listening very closely, right? That's not a thing, I think, right? I think that, like, I think obviously, all of those prejudices exist and are damaging, and, et cetera. If being an anti-racist means that, like, you don't use racial slurs or tolerate other people using them in your presence, then obviously that's a good thing. But I think that the sort of analysis that you get in this worldview at a structural level, and in fact, one of my big beefs with these people is that they use the word structure in sort of a nonsensical way. That, like, you make everything sounds more theoretically robust if you put the word structural or systemic before it, right? Mm-hmm. Even if you're talking about culture and ideology, you can say,
yeah.
Oh, well, actually, this is a structural position, right? And then, like, you explain what you mean by structural position. It's just all culture and ideology shit. Like, it's a really depressing word game. But yeah, what the analysis of what's wrong with the world tends to divide up the population into certain kinds of collective entities: white people, black people, men, women, that are postulated to have these kinds of collective interests that are that are sort of innately in conflict with each other, right? So the ultimate, I don't want to spend too much time on this part because I'm not saying anything that anybody watches the show doesn't already know. This is the show that spent so much time talking about this stuff. They sell Anglo-pessimism shirts, right?
Bestseller, by the way.
But like, think about the thing that's being mocked by that, right? That the sort of Afro-pessimist premise that, like, oh, there's this thing called white supremacy that, is what was sort of causally at work in creating the conditions of 1619 and 1776 and 1860 and 1995 and 2024, and
The entire globe is anti-black. Literally, the entire globe is anti-black, and anything close to blackness is hated. It's all anti-blackness.
Yes. If
It's all about your physical blackness.
Yeah, if
so
anybody,
Lena Horne doesn't have to suffer from anti-blackness. she's fine. Lena Horne's fine.
To tweak a line that I've often heard you use in the other direction. I've been white for a long time, and, I've heard a few people say fucked up things about race over the course of my life, but I've never once heard anybody end one of those things with except for the light skinned ones. They're all right.
Yeah. I sure do hate niggers, but there's some cute lighter ones that I like that are okay because I can take them home and maybe fool my friends a little bit and say that she's Italian. Like, and I brought this up. I don't remember if this was the Champagne Room or on a regular show. I brought this up in a car full of, let's say, white passing people, right? Me, you, Jean Bajlan, and a woman I was dating at the time. We went to a wedding in Canada, and while crossing the border, I was a victim of Afro-pessimism. I got into a fight with a border guard, and
not physically, although I did worry.
I was ready to get out of the car. I was so ready to get out of the car. Fuck you, fascist Jack. None of the white people used their privilege to protect me.
I know,
and I don't think their privilege would have protected me. I think they would have got the same anal cavity search as me.
Yeah. No, I think Koopa maybe could have pulled that off best out of any of us. That he could have leaned over, for the passenger seat. Excuse me, sir. I'm a white man, so I would like, if it's all right, I'll just extend my pass to these people, and we can keep going. Yeah. No. So that's the view, and notice that when people say that, right, that because many things have changed since the 1600s, right? There's society we live in is very different. A hot take, right? But the thing that's supposed to be continuous between all of these things is that, like, white people as a collective interest group are imposing their will on black people and perhaps to some extent other groups as collective interest groups. And which is really very, very much the opposite of the sort of traditional left take on racism, racial oppression, because the sort of traditional view about this on certainly the socialist left was that actually like white people in the South, were being sold fool's gold, right? That's like, yeah, maybe racism offers a vicarious sense of identification with people with actual power, but that doesn't give you any power. And in fact, their material interests would be served by aligning themselves with the non-white part of the working class. Whereas on this view, it's like, look, it certainly sounds like, when I hear these people talk, it certainly sounds like they're saying, no, Jim Crow wasn't. Exactly. Jim Crow, wasn't something that like was, used to divide and conquer, the working class. It was actually in the interests of, white people in general. And that's why we have, mass incarceration today. That's why we have, take your pick, right? And the thing that's really striking to me about this is, you'll listen to this later on the podcast.
I'm letting you talk. Go ahead. Finish.
No. If you're apologize.
Don't look on the screen now if you're gonna.
Awesome.
I'm so sorry because you're over here having this really clippable moment, and I'm just thinking, I want to clip this, but I also want to make sure when I clip it that is on the screen. But
fair enough. Yeah, I mean, but it's like, look, this view postulates what sounds to me like this eternal and really unresolvable conflict between these collective interest groups, right? So it's like, look, don't get me wrong, all politics involves conflict, like any political analysis involves some kind of, assignment of friends and enemies, of course, right? But there is a fundamental difference here, that if you're talking about workers and capitalists, there is an endpoint to that, right? There's, if we take away the capitalist property, they're not capitalists anymore, and society is no longer divided between workers and capitalists. Whereas on this kind of view that we're talking about, and I've been framing it in terms of race because I think that's maybe the most sort of rhetorically powerful version of this. It's maybe the dominant version, last few years especially. But we could tell similar stories about any of the other poles of identity, right? About gender, sexuality, disability, any of that stuff. That if you sort of see things through this prism, that any kind of disproportionality and who gets what is a symptom of one of these sort of big collective entities that imposing its will on the other ones, then it's really unclear how that would ever end. Because look, you could achieve perfect demographic representation, but which often seems to be the implicit goal, and this is so we have exactly the right proportions of which members of each group sit on the board of Lockheed Martin, and exactly proportional representation of who goes to a school with a metal detector at the entrance, and all of that stuff, which is good job, guys. Sounds like utopia to me. But but like, even so, that's fragile, right? It's like, look, what if the next year you fall out of perfect proportionality, right? Isn't that, isn't what you're describing really just kind of this this stasis, this sort of balance of forces, the like people would talk about in geopolitics, right? The balance of power, internationally. So there's no real endpoint here, which also means that your sort of eternal pitch to people who are in the oppressor groups is that it's like, look, there's no point where we're just going to be done, right? Like, you just, you are at best going to be in this ally role where you're sort of constantly on moral probation. So, to me, the most absurd example of this in the book was when Naomi Klein refers to herself as a settler in Canada, even though she's not even descended from settlers. I mean, her parents came to Canada to avoid the draft in the Vietnam War. But she refers to herself as a settler and says, "Oh, settlers like me need to learn to be better guests and neighbors in this land." So it's like, no, well, okay. So if everybody who has the wrong DNA is just this sort of permanent, they're a guest, right? Who has to mind their P's and Q's. Like, aside from the sort of absurdity of that as a normative proposition, I think just in principle, that's a silly way to go through life and to see things. It's just so deeply unappealing. I mean, this is like, you want to know why, what we're selling is, less attractive to some gettable people than what, the Wolfs and Bannons and Doors and whatnot are selling. Look at this. I mean, I think that a taste for self-mortification is pretty rare. And generally speaking, the people who are really into that are people who have it pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, that tends to be the case. There's not a lot of broke ass people that want to get flogged.
I mean, look, not there's anything wrong with that if that's what you're into. You know,
They're not paying for someone to step on their nuts.
I'm not kick shaming here, you know. Although honestly, I have more respect for paying somebody to literally step on your nuts than to do this sort of weird esoteric version where you pay Sarah Rao like $1,000
Oh.
to tell you you're a piece of shit at dinner.
I'd rather someone call me a piece of shit than step on my nuts. I'd rather you pay for that. Like, if you're gonna pay for some horrible shit, you want to get me a present. My birthday's coming up. We're probably gonna go out, and I don't want you to be like, "Hey, Jay, I got someone to step on your nuts." Have her call me the N-word. That would have been way worse, like better. I would be mad at you, but I wouldn't have a hole in my sack. I wouldn't have to duct tape my nutsack to keep one of my testes from falling out.
Like, Jason, why do you go through with that? You had to tape up your. Oh man, he was a president. I didn't want to be rude.
I didn't want to be rude. It was the thought. I didn't know what she was doing, and she took out that spiked high heel, and the rest is history. Now you know.
At that point, it would have just been awkward to like say no, stop.
And then I yell at her before she steps on me.
Because I nut quick.
Right there.
Awesome.
We won't be live streaming my birthday party now. We're here in the red light district of TJ. Ben, why are you smiling?
Oh, I just can't wait for Jason to open my present. Oh, yeah.
What were we talking?
I'm just trying to imagine, like finding some like nice Mexican girl, one of those places, and like tried to explain what I wanted her to do. Are you sure?
All of a sudden, all the girls start running to you because they can't wait to step on somebody's nuts. They start getting a dance routine ready. Yeah, I'm not leaving now for my birthday. I don't. Whatever you and David have planned sound real diabolical. Lady Braga says middle school boys. You goddamn right.
Yeah, sure.
You are goddamn right.
Yeah.
47 in 2 weeks, and I'm still 12 years old in my mind.
Yeah. 47 going on 11. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I'm totally fine. What responsibility? Let's end with this. We've been going on for an hour, and in some of that hour, we actually were serious. What responsibility do intellectuals and thought leaders have in addressing the rise of these mirror world movements, and how can leftist thinkers and activists better communicate their ideas to prevent co-optation by these doppelgangers? And your opinion?
Yeah. So I think that I think that it is important to be clear on the differences in both cases, that between certainly what we want and what right-wing pseudo-populist types want, in that front of the ideological war. And also between what we want and and what and what the kind of people who have been criticizing here want. And, I think that the real sort of, in a certain sense, right? I mean, like the real diagonalism comes from people who have, accept some like really outright leftist, not just liberal principles, but sort of want to find some way of mixing and matching with these things that doesn't really make sense. So I think I think when it comes to the kind of mirror world that Naomi Klein is exploring in the book, which I really do want to circle back to one of the first things I said and say that it actually is a good book. I mean, like I have, I know a pretty, harsh critique of certain things that she says, right? But, it's, that doesn't mean that it's a bad book. I actually think it's a book that's very much worth your time overall. There are just certain things to sort of have a critical eye out for. But, when it comes to people who, come from these kind of, have this sort of left terminology, who want to combine it with the kind of mirror world she's talking about, oftentimes that ends up in sort of silly and clownish places, think MAGA communism. But then when people want to combine it with, this kind of identitarian liberalism, which I would argue is ultimately this kind of managerial, professional class liberalism. I don't think the two are really disentangleable. I don't, I don't actually think the problem is elite capture. I think that the idea that there was some good, there was like the original good identity
the original Booker T platform was like, that was already captured there, Broham.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I think people who try to combine those things, it doesn't register as clownish the way that like MAGA communism does, because we're all so used to it. And I think that there are sort of some sociologically not mysterious reasons why we're all kind of used to it. And I don't want to end this on too much of a downer, but like, I think that part of the problem is that there isn't really a sort of robust left that's rooted in an organized working class that has its own institutions in a way that, I mean, they're like, we had flashes of at certain points in American history, with, certainly if you go back to, I don't know, the Wobblies or the Socialist Party of America, the Debs era, like the CIO in the 30s and socialists and communists, who are doing things then that could exert its own kind of gravitational pull, right? Like, you actually had people who were sort of coming from being liberals who were like fellow travelers and kind of, get into the pull of that. And we just don't have anything like that right now. Not really. Like, and I'm not saying this to shit on anything that anybody is doing. I think that, I think that people do the best that they can with what they have. I'm just trying to be real about the objective situation that, that we certainly don't have an organized working class in the United States. There's like well under a 7% rate of private sector unionization. The organization that currently exists isn't particularly radical. There's no sort of robust lefty institutional culture for people to sort of gravitate around, right? Like, I write for Jacobin. I guess that's about the closest we got, right? But I'm gonna air some dirty laundry in public here and reveal the shocking truth that I would not be able to pay my rent just on that, right? So
You'll be stepping on testicles. You'll be. Big Birds have those short shorts on.
Yeah, a lot of people
money ain't what you think it is, fellas.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You still got to do your testicle stepping on the side. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe Mexican rent, but then there's also groceries, and
God forbid trying to eat.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very different situation than if like you and I had like staff jobs on like the Daily Worker, right?
Oh, yeah.
In 1937, right? Like we're just not in that situation, right? We have and because we're not in that situation, the sort of left such as it exists is one that is often drawn from and often exists in exactly those spaces. Thank you. Where this kind of identity-based liberalism is the most hegemonic. Academia, media that's not, the now non-existent Daily Worker, and it's real uncomfortable if you are in those spaces to say the kinds of things that I've been saying for the last hour or so. All right. You don't get a lot of friends by doing that because people it reads as class reductionism. It's a very awkward stance to take, and which is one of the reasons I'm out here writing for Jacobin, stepping on testicles, instead of doing that stuff. And it's and so I think there's every social incentive to try to split the difference and be like, oh yeah, I know I'm kind of crazy. I want stuff that goes beyond what you do, but like, yeah, no, I totally agree with you on all that stuff, right? And it's the coward's way out, right? It's I keep thinking about when Amber Frost was on, and I said something about how I understood that lots of people, we were talking about the infamous DSA convention a few years ago. And I said, look, I get that a lot of people are conflict averse. And Amber was like, does that mean being a pussy? It is what it is. So I think that, I think it is necessary though to push this kind of critique and at least kind of hold up the flag for this better kind of left politics. I don't want to exaggerate what that's going to accomplish in the near term, because I also don't think that, I always joke, right? It's like there's no combination of keys that I can press on Restream that's going to change like the overall alignment of class forces in the U.S., right? Like these are, these are much bigger problems, and I'm not saying that as a counsel of defeat. Like we should just give up forever, right? Things can and do change, but I think it's healthy to have a realistic sense of the degree of influence that we can or can't exert, right? So it's not like, oh, there's something that Ben and Jason can do that can like will into existence a organized working class, and I don't know, let's give ourselves like an independent socialist party while we're at it, just to as long as we're we're just playing pretend, that we could just will these things into existence like we're making the girl in Weird Science, right? That's
so you stop telling people how we spend the weekend.
You're accused of being middle school boys earlier, so I figured I might as well just lean into it. I think there's a limited amount we could do. These are very long-term projects, but I think you do at least have to be clear on what the project is.
Yeah, agreed. His name is Benjamin Burgis. His latest article is in Damage magazine. Left Identitarianism is a Mirror World, a review of Naomi Klein's Doppelganger. Wherever you are watching or listening to the show, there are links in the description to that article. Ben Burgis, do you have any more articles coming out? And what are you going to be talking about tomorrow on this very channel at 1 p.m. Pacific time?
Yes. Man, I always have articles coming out. But I'm actually not 100% sure. I don't know how long I have to wait before I start to harass my doppelganger Ben Fong about taking another article from me. But I do like writing for Damage a lot. I think it's a really good magazine. I think it's filling a useful niche.
Yeah.
So
Catherine Liu has a new article out in Damage. If she wasn't in Australia, I'd have her on talking about Kamala Harris and the election.
Nice.
Kind of in line with what I wrote, but with better words. She's really smart.
Yeah, Catherine Liu. She has the best words.
Catherine Liu. I hope she sees this. I hope you see this. Catherine and Peter. They have the best words. They have the best toilets.
Yeah, I feel so bad that I didn't have to pee when I was at her house.
Dude, if you don't sit to pee at Catherine Liu's house, you are not experiencing the full-on luxury that is that house. Makes me reconsider, like, maybe I should have went to school and been an academic, because this shit is dope. This whole neighborhood was built for you people. This is insane.
Yeah. Well, look, I am unironically glad that since that Catherine Liu gets to enjoy that, because I have to say I don't particularly like most of the people who get to enjoy that. So I'm actually glad that Catherine does. Yeah. So yeah, I am. I'm actually. When I have, when a decent amount of time has passed to hit up Ben Fong, I actually might see if he wants another book review. I've been reading John Gantz's When the Clock Broke. But in any case, the article that I am going to be talking about with Stefan Bertrand-Lee at this very channel tomorrow at 1 p.m. West Coast and other times, other places. I don't know. You guys do the math. Is called Politico, listed 6 thinkers who shaped J.D. Vance's worldview. I know 2 of them, which is about this very weird realization that I had when I read that article in Politico, that I've actually done debates with 2 of these guys. And so I say some more in-depth things about what I got out of both of them. But I guess the sort of headline here is that J.D. Vance was not in fact radicalized into his current sort of based right-wing populism by summer vacation to Appalachia as a child, but has actually been influenced by a lot of people in the Tealverse, and because I have spent some time around them. So Curtis Yarvin is somebody who I did a debate with 2 years ago about, right? It was actually the night before the LA live show that we did. And I think, look, I've done debates with a lot of people I think are, bad people. You know, uh, Curtis Yarvin is probably the most intensely unpleasant one. I get into that in the essay, and yeah, there are based on the fact that JD Vance has described this guy as a friend, has referenced some of his ideas in interviews. I have some questions. I would really enjoy it if some enterprising journalist asked him about whether he agrees with some of this stuff, because it seems relevant. Man's running for vice president of the United States, and Donald Trump is what, like 79, and seems to eat fast food all the time. So
Man of
if
my
he,
heart, man. I'm jealous.
I'm not hating, but I would say, were I an actuary, I think that if he, I think if Donald Trump became president, I don't think a heart attack would shock anybody.
I'm 46 and I can't eat fast food more than once a week. So that man's colon must just a chiseled war veteran kind of colon he has.
Yeah,
He's got to be shitting a 2x4. Like, seriously.
Yeah.
How do you? I mean, he's not the slimmest character, but he's also an older dude now. I don't believe I don't believe it. I think it's just part of the lore of Donald Trump, because there's no way you can, because he's like 79, unless he's some sort of weird android man. Like you can open him up from the, like, I don't believe, I refuse to believe that. I refuse to believe that. Also, his reflexes during that shooting thing, that was pretty, I'm not gonna lie, when I watched that, I was like, that's badass. I can't deny how badass that was.
Yeah. Soon, this is my Iron Maiden t-shirt.
I have a different Iron Maiden t-shirt. I have Killers, and that is not Killers.
No,
that's
certainly.
Run to the Hills.
Certainly
I have the pre-Bruce Dickinson Iron Maiden shirt. That's how I'm living my life. Okay. When this show is over, I'm going to blare Wrathchild from the terrace just to shit on Burgess on his side of the street.
I would really enjoy that. Please do.
An Iron Maiden war to try to fight all the reggae tones. We can hear the festival from where we live.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
And you maybe see it if you have binoculars or something. You could probably see it. Dizzle McFizzle always asks where the hoe's at, or something like that. It's like, Dizzle.
Oh, downtown Missouri.
Oh my God, if you were here right now, you would just be beside yourself. Living on the wrong side of Rosarito. You speak for yourself, Dusty.
Yeah,
on the right side down.
Yeah, look, man, I'm old. I just want to, like, drink my 2 cups of coffee and write my little articles for Jacobin, and watch a YouTube video about whatever happened to the original premise for Terminator 3 and go to sleep.
And I'm just trying to watch all the Terminator knockoff movies that Ben Burgess won't watch. And I found at least 3 starring Billy Blanks.
Yeah, that's all right.
So the white colon privilege is pretty funny. That Trump has white colon privilege. Okay, well, Ben, thank you for hanging out with me. I'm sure you have things you have to do. I'm supposed to write something. There's a very small part of me that wants to try to convince you to walk down to Popotla.
Let's see. I've got to write the lecture for tomorrow's Capital class. So that's which is, yeah, which I guess goes to what I was just saying about being extremely fucking boring. But there you have it.
David Epps knows the movie. David Epps knows the movie. TC 2000. That is the movie. Billy Blanks' Terminator. That is very true. All right, thank you guys. Well, I'm going to get out of here. Ben Burgis is going to write his lecture for Capital class. We will be back Tuesday. No, actually, no, we'll be back tomorrow.
Right.
Or Ben will be back tomorrow. He'll be talking about J.D. Vance. He won't be talking about getting his testicles or stepping on any testicles.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah, every now and again, I like to have a whole conversation on the podcast without anybody's testicles being stepped on.
Sometimes it's worth it. But thank you guys so much. The TIR will be back tomorrow with Ben Burgis and Stephen Bertram Lee. We are out.